In the early years of the United States, many people believed that the young democratic republic was immune to political violence, and therefore, the U.S. president did not always have a protective detail. The White House was even relatively open, with only one policeman and a secretary standing between the president and Pennsylvania Avenue. However, with each presidential assassination, the level of protection has increased to not only protect the president, but also their family, former presidents, and presidential candidates. One of the most notable presidential assassinations in U.S. history was that of John F. Kennedy, who was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas, on November 22, 1963. Kennedy's assassination was a turning point in the way the U.S. government approached presidential security. Before Kennedy's death, the protection of the president was handled by the Secret Service on a part-time basis. Following Kennedy's assassination, the Secret Service's role was expanded to provide full-time protection for the president and their families. The Secret Service was created in 1865 as a law enforcement agency to combat the counterfeiting of U.S. currency. Over time, the agency's responsibilities expanded to include the protection of the president and other high-ranking government officials. Today, the U.S. president is one of the most heavily protected people in the world. The assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, sent shockwaves throughout the world and forever changed the way the United States government approached presidential security. Before his death, the notion of political violence and the need for constant protection seemed remote, and the president's safety was not always a top priority. However, the tragic events in Dallas, Texas, prompted a reevaluation of security measures, leading to the expansion of the Secret Service's role and the creation of a new era of protection for the nation's leaders. Kennedy's assassination was a turning point in American history, highlighting the importance of adapting to new threats and challenges. Join us as we delve into the circumstances that led to the tragic assassination of John F. Kennedy and how this event changed the course of U.S. history, ultimately leading to a new era of presidential security. The assassination of John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, on November 22, 1963, remains one of the most infamous and controversial events in American history. The killing of JFK, as he was commonly known, shocked the nation and the world, and triggered numerous conspiracy theories that continue to captivate and divide people to this day. In the early 1960s, the United States was embroiled in a fierce battle against the Soviet Union, which had escalated into the Cold War. The young, charismatic President John F. Kennedy, who had been elected to the White House in 1960, was determined to lead his country to victory in this epic struggle. However, his ambitious plans to counter communism faced numerous challenges, both at home and abroad. One of the key challenges for Kennedy was to deal with the troublesome regime of Fidel Castro in Cuba, which was openly aligned with the Soviet Union. In 1961, Kennedy authorized a covert operation to overthrow Castro, known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. However, the mission failed miserably, and Kennedy was forced to accept the blame for the debacle. Undeterred, Kennedy continued to pursue his goal of containing communism in the Western Hemisphere. In 1962, he faced his greatest challenge yet, when Soviet missiles were discovered on Cuban soil, threatening the security of the United States. The ensuing Cuban Missile Crisis was a defining moment of the Cold War, as Kennedy deftly navigated the perilous situation, avoiding a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets. As Kennedy's presidency approached the halfway point, he turned his attention to domestic politics, specifically his upcoming re-election campaign. To secure his party's nomination, Kennedy needed to win over key constituencies, including the powerful Democratic Party leaders in Texas. Kennedy's trip to Texas in November 1963 was intended to serve multiple purposes. Firstly, he hoped to raise funds for his re-election campaign, as well as to begin laying the groundwork for his campaign in the Lone Star State. Secondly, he sought to mend fences with various factions of the Texas Democratic Party, who had been at odds with each other.
I'm glad to be here in Jim Wright City, about 35 About 35 years ago, a congressman from California, just been elected, received a letter from an irate constituent which said, during your campaign, you promised to have the Sierra Madre Mountains reforested. You've been in office for 1 month and you haven't done so.
However, Kennedy's visit would prove to be tragically short-lived. On November 22, 1963, while riding in an open-air limousine through the streets of Dallas, Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. The shocking event sent shockwaves through the nation, as Americans struggled to come to terms with the loss of their young, charismatic leader. Lee Harvey Oswald was a former United States Marine who had a tumultuous and controversial life. Oswald's story begins with his military service, which took him to Japan and the Philippines. However, his career took a turn for the worse when he accidentally shot his elbow with an unauthorized handgun and subsequently fought with an officer over the incident. As a result of his behavior, Oswald faced 2 court-martials and was demoted. However, he managed to get a hardship discharge in September 1959, claiming that his mother was ill. This discharge placed him in the United States Marine Corps Reserve, and he began to seek new opportunities. It was during this time that Oswald made a fateful decision. In 1959, he defected to the Soviet Union, seeking a new life and ideology. He settled in Minsk, Belarus, where he worked as a factory worker. It was there that he met Marina Prusakova in 1961, whom he later married. The following year, the couple had a child. Despite his new life in the Soviet Union, Oswald eventually decided to return to the United States. In 1962, he was repatriated with the help of a loan of $435.71 from the U.S. Embassy. He settled in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, hoping to start anew. However, Oswald's past actions continued to follow him. He was a man of conflicting beliefs and exhibited a deep-seated resentment toward American society. This resentment ultimately led him to carry out one of the most shocking acts in American history: the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. On November 22, 1963, Oswald fired 3 shots at the president from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository in Dallas. Kennedy was hit by 2 of the bullets and died shortly afterward. Oswald was later apprehended and charged with the murder of JFK. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy arrived at Dallas Love Field to begin his motorcade through the city. The planned route was intended to give him maximum exposure to local crowds before a luncheon at the Dallas Market Center. Kennedy's itinerary for the day was carefully planned by the Secret Service, but as events would soon prove, no amount of planning could prepare for what was to come. As Kennedy's motorcade left Love Field, the crowds that had gathered to see the president was estimated to be between 150,000 to 200,000 people. The atmosphere was electric, and Kennedy was in high spirits as he waved to the adoring crowds from the back of his open-top 1961 Lincoln Continental 4-door convertible limousine. The motorcade made its way through a suburban section of Dallas before reaching downtown along Main Street. It then turned right onto North Houston Street for 1 block before turning left onto Elm Street and passing through Dealey Plaza. This part of the route had been widely reported in Dallas newspapers several days before the event, allowing people who wished to view the motorcade to plan their viewing locations. As the motorcade continued down Elm Street, shots were fired by Lee Oswald, and chaos erupted. Kennedy's limousine was hit, and the president was gravely wounded. Secret Service agents Clint Hill and Jack Reddy rushed to the back of the limousine to protect the president and First Lady, but it was too late. Kennedy had been hit, and there was no way to save him. Amid the pandemonium, Mrs. Kennedy began to climb out onto the back of the limousine. Her mind was in a fog of shock and disbelief, and she couldn't recall why she had done it later. Hill, a Secret Service agent, noticed her movement and believed she was reaching for something, perhaps a piece of Kennedy's skull. Without hesitation, he jumped onto the back of the limousine. Meanwhile, Governor Connolly and his wife heard Mrs. Kennedy repeatedly saying, "They have killed my husband. I have his brains in my hand." Her words were chilling, and it was clear that she was in a state of shock. As Hill clung to the car, it sped off to Parkland Memorial Hospital. Mrs. Kennedy crawled back into her limousine seat, and her thoughts were consumed by her dying husband. She recalled, "All the ride to the hospital, I kept bending over him, saying, 'Jack, Jack, can you hear me? I love you, Jack.' I kept holding the top of his head down, trying to keep the brains in." It was a heartbreaking scene as the First Lady cradled her husband's head, attempting to keep his brains from spilling out. The love between them was evident, and it was clear that Mrs. Kennedy was devastated by the loss of her beloved husband. Dr. George Berkeley, Kennedy's physician, arrived at the hospital only minutes after Kennedy had been brought in. Despite efforts to save him, it quickly became apparent that the president's wounds were too severe. The doctors fought valiantly to revive him, but his heart activity ceased at 1 p.m. Father Oscar Huber, a Roman Catholic priest, was called to administer the last rites to the president. By the time he arrived, Kennedy had already passed away. The official cause of death, as listed on his death certificate, was a gunshot wound to the skull. The news of Kennedy's death sent shockwaves throughout the country and the world. The vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, was immediately sworn in as the new president of the United States. It was a somber moment in American history, one that would be remembered for generations to come.
It's official. As of just a few moments ago, the President of the United States is dead.
After the assassination, Oswald fled the scene and made his way back to his rooming house in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas. He picked up a jacket and a revolver and left, and shortly afterward, he was stopped by Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, who had been alerted to be on the lookout for a suspect in the assassination. Oswald shot and killed Tippit, and then fled the scene. Police and federal agents launched a massive manhunt for Oswald, and he was eventually located hiding in the Texas Theater, a movie theater in the Oak Cliff neighborhood. Police arrested Oswald and charged him with the murder of President Kennedy and Officer Tippit. Lee Harvey Oswald was interrogated by several law enforcement agencies after he was arrested for the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the murder of Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit. Oswald was initially interrogated by Dallas police officers for several hours, during which he denied any involvement in the assassination and claimed to be a patsy. Oswald was later interrogated by officials from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, who were also investigating the assassination. The FBI conducted 3 formal interviews with Oswald, during which they attempted to gather information about his background, his political beliefs, and his possible involvement in the assassination. During the interviews, Oswald was generally uncooperative and evasive, refusing to answer many questions or giving contradictory answers. He also claimed that he was being framed for the assassination and that he had no knowledge of any conspiracy to kill the president. Despite Oswald's claims of innocence, the evidence against him was strong, and he was charged with the murder of President Kennedy and Officer Tippit. Oswald was held in police custody for 2 days and was scheduled to be transferred to the county jail on November 24, 1963. However, on the morning of the transfer, as Oswald was being escorted through the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters, a nightclub owner, Jack Ruby, shot and killed him in front of a crowd of reporters and police officers. Jack Ruby, the nightclub owner who shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald, was tried and convicted of murder in 1964. The trial took place in Dallas, Texas, and was presided over by Judge Joe B. Brown. Ruby's defense team argued that he had shot Oswald on impulse, out of grief and anger over the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. They also claimed that Ruby was not in his right mind at the time of the shooting, due to the stress and trauma of the events of the preceding days. The prosecution argued that Ruby's actions were premeditated and that he had intentionally killed Oswald to prevent him from revealing any information about a larger conspiracy. They also pointed to Ruby's previous criminal history and his association with organized crime figures as evidence of his willingness to commit violent acts. After a week-long trial, the jury found Ruby guilty of murder with malice, and he was sentenced to death. Ruby appealed the conviction, but the appeals court upheld the verdict, and he remained in prison awaiting execution. However, in 1967, Ruby's conviction was overturned by a Texas appeals court, which ruled that he had not received a fair trial due to pretrial publicity and other factors. Ruby was granted a new trial, but he died of lung cancer before it could take place. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy has remained one of the most debated and controversial events in modern history. The official investigation conducted by the Warren Commission, which concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, has been widely criticized and disputed by many researchers, historians, and conspiracy theorists. One of the main reasons for skepticism is the sheer complexity of the assassination. The official narrative suggests that Oswald, a former Marine with a history of unstable behavior and communist sympathies, acted alone in carrying out the assassination. However, many find it difficult to believe that a single relatively unskilled shooter could have fired 3 shots in quick succession with such deadly accuracy. Furthermore, the Warren Commission's investigation was marred by inconsistencies and irregularities that fueled suspicions of a cover-up. Witnesses who claimed to have heard shots coming from the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza were ignored, despite their testimony contradicting the official version of events. The role of various government agencies and powerful individuals in the events leading up to and following the shooting has also been questioned. Conspiracy theories suggest that Kennedy was targeted by factions within the CIA, the FBI, or the military-industrial complex because of his perceived political naivety and attempts to curb their power. There are even allegations that Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson may have been involved in the assassination and cover-up. The aftermath of the assassination revealed deep divisions and tensions within American society, particularly concerning issues of race, class, and political power. The investigation was marked by a sense of mistrust and suspicion of the government and media as many Americans struggled to make sense of the chaotic events of that fateful day. In the years following the assassination, a counterculture movement emerged, challenging mainstream political and cultural values. The JFK assassination became a symbol of this cultural shift, representing a turning point in American history where the country lost its innocence and belief in progress. Despite the many unanswered questions and unresolved debates, the killing of John F. Kennedy remains a defining event of the 20th century, captivating and haunting us with its mystery, tragedy, and enduring significance. Thank you for watching this video, exploring the JFK assassination and its lasting impact on American history and culture. While there is still much we don't know about the events of November 22, 1963, it's clear that the assassination of John F. Kennedy was a moment that shook the nation to its core and continues to fascinate and intrigue us to this day. As always, we welcome your comments and feedback, and we look forward to continuing the conversation on this important and complex topic. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Till then, stay safe and stay informed.